Welcome to the Diversity in STEM podcast, where we interview leaders in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to help inspire students of all ages. My name is Joe Kent, and I'm the Director of Education for the National Atomic Testing Museum. My guest today is Dr. Jessica Osuna. Dr. Jessica Osuna is an atmospheric scientist for the National Atmospheric Release Advisory Center at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. In 2012, Dr. Osuna joined Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory as a postdoctoral research associate in the Atmospheric, Earth, and Energy Division. 4 years later, Dr. Osuna joined the National Atmospheric Release Advisory Center at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory as a research and operations scientist. Dr. Osuna received her Bachelor of Science degree in Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign. She then completed her Ph.D. in Environmental Sciences, Policy, and Management at the University of California, Berkeley. After completing her Ph.D., Jessica joined the University of New Mexico and Los Alamos National Laboratory to conduct research on drought resiliency of the pinyon juniper woodlands at the Sevietta Long-Term Ecological Research Site. Hello, Dr. Osuna. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a real pleasure, like I said, and let's just jump right in. Now, to give our listeners a chance to get to know you better, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. It's funny because you've already said a lot of the first things that I often use to describe myself as a scientist, but there's so much more to me. So originally I'm from the rural Midwest, west of Chicago, very much out in the rural area, not the suburbs. I very much defines who I am that I come from a large blue collar family. I grew up working in the cornfields, detasseling, which many Midwestern kids will relate to. And from there, you know, after what you've stated of my educational path, I ended up out in California. And so now I'm a mother to two middle schoolers.
So that must have been really interesting going from Snowbelt, Midwest Chicago, and going out to California. What was the transition like for that? That had to have been a pretty crazy ride.
Yeah, you know, it was hard at first, especially for my family, because we didn't get out much or leave the area very much at all. We didn't travel. I hadn't been on an airplane, you know, none of that. And so I was really jumping ship and moving west. But from the first time I came out to visit California for grad school, I landed and I said, this is where I belong. This is home for me. It just felt like everyone was very much open to be all of who you are here. And I do not miss the winter a single day of my life. Snow is beautiful through the window, but when you got to walk to classes and you got to get kids to school, I'm not a fan. So I very much like the weather out here.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate. I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania, almost into Ohio, and, you know, coming out to Las Vegas, same kind of thing, you know, very much felt like home instantly. And I love pictures of snow, not a big fan of having to deal with it on the way to work. So absolutely. So I'll let you continue.
Yeah, so you get it. And it's, you know, it's a great place to raise my kids. I appreciate all of the small town values and work ethic that I still hold for my family here, but now I have a greater appreciation for all of the things I can enjoy, like museums with my kids. And so to tell you about myself, you know, I'm really very an eclectic person. I take pride in trying to learn about as much as possible. And so I love to dance. I love to hike. I love to read all different kinds of books. I love to go watch sports and go to museums and just kind of take in all that there is to do in life and do it all with my kids as much as possible. So we keep very busy out here, and big Cubs fans. We watch a lot of Cubs games, and my daughter is an artist, and my son is into sports and politics, and so we very much track outside of science. We will track a lot of social issues and local politics, and try to get involved as much as possible, and just, you know, like I said, just kind of take in as much of life as there is. And through it all, taking advantage of technology to stay really close to my family back home. It is very hard to be so far away. I have 5 nieces and 5 nephews. I have 5 siblings, and of course their spouses, and I'm very, very close to my family. So it is hard being out here, but it's a great place to visit. So a lot of I get to pull people out in non-COVID times to come and take a vacation out here.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, absolutely. It sounds like family is really important to you. It sounds like it's really a driving force, talking about just the way it comes across when you're talking about whether it's your kids or your family back east in the Midwest. It sounds like you're very close to, like you said, very close to your family, but that it's also very much a part of who you are, kind of a driving force.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we talk about my career and things I do now, I always thought about, even before I had kids, before I was married, that feeling of pride to hear someday my kids say, my mom did this, or to, give that feeling of pride to my mom who supported me so much, let her say, my daughter has accomplished this, just something very different. And I really wanted to always be in a job where I could tell my family about it and they would understand what I was doing. They've always supported me, and I'm the only one in my family that's a scientist, and my sisters have a big joke. They came out when I lived in Albuquerque, and I kind of took them around the site where I was working and everything, and they would, they didn't really get anything, and they would say, "Ooh, science-y."
Very good. That's great. And speaking of science, let's actually talk about what interested you in atmospheric and environmental sciences. Was there a particular moment when you decided you wanted to study and build a career around these subjects? I mean, the way you talk about it, it's obviously it's something that you're still very passionate about. So you can tell us what actually was the driving force of that.
Yeah, so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I will say that from the get-go. And it's kind of unfair to ask kids who come from a very small town out in the middle of nowhere what they want to be, because you don't have that exposure. But I was always very much interested in atmospheric science, which I didn't really know the name, right? I thought it was very cool to watch tornadoes, and I loved going out. My father was interested in astronomy and space, and so we would go out and watch. I remember watching Halley's Comet with him. I would, as soon as I got old enough, much to the dismay of my mother, I would go out and look for storms that could produce tornadoes. And I did get one, I spotted one. And so I was just very always interested in the atmosphere, looking up.
So you're very much a storm chaser right out the gate, like as early as you could walk. You're all about the storms. Most kids, I'm sure, at that age are, they hear the thunder, they see the storms, and it's scary, right? But you were absolutely ready to charge right in. That's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah, my mom would head to the basement and she'd have to drag me, no, you're coming down to the basement with me, and I would want to go outside. So I didn't really know, that could become a career. Being, like I said, from the Midwest and not getting out to, forests or natural ecosystems, never having seen a mountain or anything, I always kind of felt this pull to go experience nature in a more true way. And so towards the end of undergrad, I was lucky to have the opportunity to go participate in research and live in a forest in northern Michigan over a summer. And that was, just completely eye-opening. I lived in a little tin shack a few meters away from a big lake, and I would climb towers in a forest and hike out to the site. And it was really adventurous, and I loved it. And the project that I was working on at that point was not atmospheric science related very closely. It was very much biological, but looking at kind of how the land surface and atmosphere interacted. And that's really the moment when I knew that I wanted to be working at this interface between the land surface and the atmosphere, because I knew that had gotten me out and I liked out a lot.
Well, then, yeah, it sounds like you had a true aha moment. Like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I want to do. Like you said, at the intersection of all of these things and being outdoors and looking at the atmosphere and everything that's going around. That's a pretty amazing. That's great.
Yeah, I was really lucky to have that experience, and it kind of led to a lot more experiences. And one of the real benefits of that is I had no idea about this concept of, the ivory tower of academia and intellectuals and science and how all of this world worked. I knew as a good student I was supposed to go to college, but I didn't know what all of that meant. And so living in this forest at this research station, I was interacting on a daily basis at every meal with professors, and they were very casual and they had families, and we would sit down and have meals together. It was very casual, and it gave me a glimpse of the humanity of professors also, and started to kind of turn on that light bulb that, oh, I could do this too. It's not people that are so different from me that it's inaccessible. And so it really kind of allowed me to start imagining things well beyond what I had ever kind of been exposed to before.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where sometimes I feel like our own insecurities can kind of create this block or this or lack of understanding how this world works. Yeah, we sometimes put others who are in, like you said, academia and almost on a pedestal, and not looking at them as real people. But once you go, when you get past that, you really realize that, yeah, these are people who are just as interested in this stuff as you, and that they love being outside, like you said, especially with what you do. You have a lot of people who you have similar interests. So it's, once you get to that point, it does make you feel a lot more comfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they very much, between the older students who were working out there and the professors, they very much encouraged those types of interactions and opened up to conversations that might be otherwise uncomfortable for a young woman like myself who was initially out of my element. So that was kind of my aha moment when I knew what I wanted to do.
Great.
Very generally.
And speaking of people who encouraged you, we'll go into, were there any family members, teachers, or as you mentioned, experts in the field who encouraged and motivated you? And more specifically, were there any women or people of color that you looked up to?
Yeah, there's not at that time especially, there weren't a lot of people of color or women in my university experience. But I will say, even before that, I have to say my mother was my biggest cheerleader. As that's what she always said. She says, I may not understand all of what you're doing, but I am your biggest cheerleader. I have got your back. And she truly, truly did. So she always encouraged me very much to just chase my dreams. And my father really built in a love of science and atmosphere and things like that. He was intrigued by it all as well. And so my mom just always encouraged me, and I was lucky to have quite a few people. But I will say the person professionally that really, really impacted me first was this amazing lecturer that I had after my first year of college. I felt kind of lost and disoriented, maybe a little bit scared and overwhelmed after being in college, a huge university, coming from a small town. And originally I was planning on taking, the typical physics and math classes over the summer. And I decided instead to kind of take a deep breath, take a break, and take a course that just interested me, just for fun. And at the time, I wasn't majoring in atmospheric science. I was in aerospace engineering. And so the lecturer of that class is named Donna Charlevoix, and she remains to this day a dear friend, a mentor, and we interact. And she took me aside and asked me, why are you taking this class? And it was a class in severe and unusual weather. And I was like, because it sounds really cool, and I really like weather, and it's always been really interesting to me. And she's like, so why aren't you majoring in this? And I thought, I don't know. That's a very good question. And so she kind of took me under her wing.
Isn't it funny sometimes how those questions, that you sit back and go, wait, why did it take someone else to explain this to me? Why did I, of course it makes so much sense, but when you're in it, all these classes, you're not necessarily thinking that way. You're thinking of, where should I be studying, not what am I passionate about.
Exactly. And I didn't really know how to connect something that I enjoyed to a career. I heard the word engineer, and I didn't really even understand what it meant, but I knew that as a minority woman in engineering, I was going to get some scholarship money if I, held up my end of the deal, and I needed to fund my education. So I'm like, sure, that sounds great. And then once I got there and realized, I knew that I had to have some sort of internal drive to actually succeed along the path, because it wasn't going to be a cakewalk. So Donna just really helped me to be exposed to some of the research that was being done in the field, and really encouraged me to engage myself in the atmospheric science department. And to this day, I've gone through a lot of things throughout my career, and I really look up to her as a strong, strong woman who advocates for others. She continues to be engaged in the field, and she's a mother also. And so I still have great conversations with her, and we keep in touch. So she is definitely the person that helped me to kind of take ownership and accountability for my own education, my own path. And now I'm happy to continue to have a few women in as mentors in my current field, and hopefully I'm serving as a mentor to others and providing the same thing.
And that's incredible, and that's why it's so great to have you on here, because we do want to reach out to young women and people from different backgrounds, and really show them that there are people like them out there doing this work and trying to inspire them. And it was also really incredible to hear one thing that we've seen where with all of our guests so far is that there's always that one professor, that one teacher, and also the support of parents, whether they get it or not, like you're saying. My parents are very much the same. My stepdad had no idea what I was talking about. I'm talking about all these museum things and books I'm reading for school, but they listened and they encouraged. And I think that's always what we've been hearing. This is the 4th episode. It's always one teacher, or parents just listening and encouraging. That makes all the difference between success and maybe not making it. Now, speaking of making, right, and speaking of making it, let's talk a little bit about the work that you do. So now you are a research and operations scientist for Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory's National Atmospheric Release Advisory Center, or NARIC for short.
Yeah, let's go with the short. It's such a mouthful. Yeah.
We're kind of used to it here at the museum.
Yeah, sure.
Now, can you explain what NARIC is and kind of walk us through what the research involves?
Yeah, for sure. So NARIC is the dream job that I never knew to dream of. It is so cool. So basically, kind of the tagline of NARIC is to provide timely, accurate, and actionable information to first responders in the event that something not good, some hazardous material gets into the atmosphere and dispersed. Dispersed meaning moved around by the wind, right? And so we are the nation's lead for managing the response to releases, especially of radiological and nuclear material. But we also can support responses when there's a release to the atmosphere of chemical or biological contaminants. And so there's this huge process. Basically, we keep over 1 million observations of weather from around the world per day. So if there's ever an incident or the threat of an incident, we can zero in on that location and simulate, kind of stitch together any information we have about the weather and create this field that describes the weather in this location. And then we have a huge series of models that can simulate how the material got into the atmosphere. Was it a bomb? Was it a nuclear bomb? Was it a fire? Is it a chemical spill? Is it any of these things, right? We can model that. Where does the material start in the atmosphere? And then we can release it into our weather field and track it downwind. And the key part of this really is that we take that then and turn it into the consequences to humans. And so we can look at the dose, that if the material is a radioactive material, we can look at the dose to a human and therefore can help to determine how long workers can be in an area, if people need to evacuate, if they need to shelter. And what's the coolest part about all of this is that, if we are doing this, then people are waiting and lives could be at risk. And so we don't have 3 days to conduct a research project. So we can do that entire process from starting the models to creating these products and communicating them to the people who are interested within 15 minutes. And that's all due. Yeah, and it can be a lot of models, it can be a lot of work, but we have done a lot of work on making the models computationally efficient, understanding what is needed and what is not, and developing a process that works. And so I'm really proud of the work we do there. Yeah.
Now that, yeah, it sounds like, this plays an important role in our country's understanding of hazardous materials and national security. So because of this, do you often find yourself working with officials from other government agencies?
Oh, totally. It's fun because I sometimes feel like I'm playing. You see these things occurring on on TV shows, and they've got all the magic screens. And I know this is a podcast, but if people could see my hands waving, right? You've got the magic screens moving all over. You've got the FBI and the CIA, and you've got the military, and you've got all these, and you've got the scientists who are in there giving the information. And in all honesty, while we don't have all of the magic screens and everything, that is really, how it works. Because if something like this were to happen in real life, if there were a dirty bomb that were to explode in an American city, we would have all hands on deck. And so we practice that as much as possible in order to understand how to operate with different agencies. So we do work a lot with the military. We work with the FBI. We work with a lot of state and local and federal officials that are really the ones responsible for making the decisions. We provide the information so that they can make the decisions. And of course, we work with NASA also. So yeah, we are one part of a large amount of assets that come to bear when it's a bad day.
It sounds like you're really that bridge between the information and the people who are going to enact the policy or react to it by sending in people to mitigate or eliminate those threats. It sounds like you're that bridge, and
Yep.
that's pretty incredible. That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, it's a fun job.
Now, when you first joined Lawrence Livermore in 2012, it was as a research associate in the Atmospheric, Earth, and Energy Division. Now, what kind of work did you do there, and how does it differ from your current position in NARAC and as the Atmospheric Science Research and Applications Group Leader for the department?
Yeah, I've really taken a turn in my career. I did a lot of research, pure research, when I joined the lab. And of course, it's always research on a mission because that's what the national lab system does. But I was very much on the research side of the house, and I was looking at the interactions between the land surface and the atmosphere, looking at the exchange of carbon dioxide and water and energy, and helping to understand all different things like the capacity to generate wind energy based on the difference in the land surface, or hydropower based on a watershed and under severe drought, doing all different sorts of carbon budgeting, energy budgeting, all of this. And I was really interested in that, and it was a great step to continue my training after the grad school. And it was an awesome experience to get to do field work and combine that with models and work through this iterative process all within a team. But from there, I really felt driven to do something much more directly connected to a mission and something almost more of a service type job. And I very much care about the community. I want to be able to feel like I'm doing something that's contributing very directly to the public.
Now, do you think that doing that work in 2012 really kind of confirmed or kind of helped you kind of focus on what you really wanted to do? Did that help sort of either push you further into that, or do you think that it basically confirming that for you?
Yeah, I think the whole time, in all honesty, I had heard from everybody, you are a Latina in STEM, you need to be a professor. Like, that was it. That was the end all be all. I needed to be a professor, right? So that I could be visible to others and encourage others and be interacting with others. But I totally value in all of my respect, especially in the times of COVID, to professors, but I didn't feel that for myself. I really felt like I wanted something much more applied. And so being at the lab gave me a little, kind of was a half a step closer to that, getting closer to a clear objective. But I will say that I didn't really know what NARAC did entirely until I started. Even though I was in the same building on the same floor, I kind of had a general idea, but I didn't really learn the mission until after I was really digging in, and I was like, this is it. This is where I was supposed to be. This is great. So I think moving to the lab definitely gave me the indication that trusting my instinct about wanting to be closer to a clear objective and a mission and more applied was correct. It was just the step close enough that I still could kind of be in the research field, but have enough exposure to a mission related position that I knew that that's the direction I needed to continue on.
That's great, and it's funny that you mentioned that there were times when I was in school, I knew I wanted to do museums and public history and things like that, and I had a lot of my professors saying, "Have you thought about teaching? Have you thought about teaching?"
Hmm.
And just like you, I value the work that teachers do and professors do, but it is not for me. I love there being something different all the time, and some of the chaos. The chaos is fun here at the museum. It's having some like activities, and you can kind of come up with anything, and you
Hmm.
can assist what the teachers are doing, but to be able to kind of make it your own and make it more informal is what I love about it. And it sounds like
Yeah, exactly. I kind of say that I'm like an ant, right? Ants can show up, they have all the fun, they get the kids all riled up, and then they pass them back. And
absolutely 100%.
I love doing that. I will say I'm really, really lucky because so I'm also the group leader of this group, and that gives me the opportunity. It's funny, I kind of take on my mother's role now because my mother was my biggest cheerleader. I get to be the biggest cheerleader for all of the people in my group. I get to advocate for them. I get to brag on them. I get to promote their work and help them make connections. And of course, I get to be the mother and nag them about turning in their time cards. But it's really great because I can also do a lot of outreach. It gives me a little more exposure to do those interactive things and get a little bit of the teaching, but be the ant, return the kids at the end of the day.
Well, that must be really special, being able to prop them up and be able to beat the drum about and be their cheerleader and for the work that they're doing. That must be a really special thing.
So I just started in the position this summer, and one of the questions that the interview committee asked me was kind of my vision for this position, whether I see it as the intellectual head of the group or kind of where I stand. And for me, there are so many bright, intelligent, innovative people at the lab that no way, I'm not going to be the intellectual head. I'm not a genius. I love the work I do. I have something to bring to bear, but I'm just constantly in awe by my colleagues and the things that they're doing and how they're able to apply their skills to problems of national interest. And so I feel really lucky to get to be there and get to peek my head in on all of the different things going on by the members of the group. So it is very fun.
That's great. Speaking of different things, most recently you were part of something out of this world. You were part of I couldn't resist, part of the staff in the Radiological Control Center at the Kennedy Space Center during the 2020 launch of the Mars rover. What was that like?
Oh my gosh. I have a hard time coming up with words because when I joined NARAC, I had no idea this type of thing was one of the things that NARAC did. And the reason that NARAC was involved is because once the rover gets to Mars, it's powered by a nuclear battery, right? And so whenever you have nuclear material, you want to make sure everybody's safe. And so that's why we were involved. And the project got passed to me, and I was afraid they were going to kick me off of the project because the first time we went to Kennedy Space Center, I was a tourist. I was like a kid in a candy shop, and I'm looking around, and I want all of the stories and all of the history. And the very first time, I kind of was trying to contain myself in the backseat of the car with my colleagues, and I'm just looking everywhere, and I have this goofy, huge grin on my face. And one of the guys who it's like his seventh launch that he's done was like, "Don't you have any questions?" And I was like, "Oh, I have so many." And so then they're like, "It's okay. We are all just as excited, even though it's our seventh launch. And so let it out." And they were all very much happy that I was like a kid in a candy shop taking it all in. So aside from the wow factor, the work was very, very cool. We got to work very closely with the Air Force Weather Squadron. We worked very closely with folks from NASA JPL and NASA headquarters and NASA KSC. And it was just, a very good example of how you have a lot of agencies working together. And it kind of brought everything full circle to me because my very first scientific interest was, my very first memory of it was looking up at Halley's Comet with my father. And so that was space related. I was literally about 3 hours away from shipping off to boot camp in the Air Force. And didn't. And so I was now working very closely with the Air Force. You know, it was weather projection, it was a mission, it was just all of the things that were of interest coming full circle. And most importantly, if you recall, I said a lot of the motivation for me throughout my career was so that one day my kids could be like, oh, you know, I would give them something to be proud of. And working on the Mars launch definitely will give your kids something to talk about. And so that for me was all worth it.
I was just gonna say, like, you must have been a rock star in your kids' eyes, right? Because now, like, the Mars rover and all of that, and being able to talk about that's something that's national news, right? So like that puts you on a different stage. So yeah, for your kids, it had to have been really cool. My mom does this; it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it was, you know, I think for a while they're just used to mom doing her science thing. Mom does her job, whatever, you know, and they're interested in it. We talk about it, and they've read actually a lot of the history of the atomic testing, the history of the US, and a lot of their books are
I'm
about
very
this.
happy to hear that.
Oh yeah, they've read Bomb, they're reading the Port Chicago crew. They read all of these types of books. So they do take interest in it, but when it's a NASA thing, you know, everybody would say, "Oh, your mom works for NASA," and I would very much say, "No, I work with the Department of Energy, and we work collaboratively with NASA on these launches because, you know, NASA has the great PR, but it gets you a little bit of street cred." So they were very
Awesome.
proud and excited. Yeah.
Well, as they should be. That's an incredible milestone. I mean, and especially with what you're talking about, as you were you saying, like, full circle, everything full circle for you, and it sounds like you did have that chance. Because one of the things I was going to ask you is, did you have a chance to soak it all in and really put in perspective and say, wow, this is where I am. This is a reality. I can picture myself when I'm awake. This is real. And it sounds like you got a chance to do that and ask all the questions you wanted. I imagine you pointing out the window and all the different things.
Yes, taking a picture of everything. NASA actually at that site, I am allowed to take pictures. So I've taken pictures of everything. And I will say on the day of the launch, so the launch occurred early one morning and I reported to the control center. We were supposed to report at midnight. And so earlier that day, I got to stand right next to the rocket before they rolled it out to the pad. I got to touch it. It was just totally amazing. And so that night, actually, the night prior, I went on to site at Kennedy Space Center and just parked where I could see the rocket on the launch pad, covered in the floodlights, lit up, ready to go. And I knew the next day was the day, right? It was all just going to end. And the hope is that it's very anticlimactic because you want a successful launch, which is very anticlimactic. You watch it go and there it goes. There's no, you know, it's beautiful, but you hope there's no big boom, right?
Right.
And so I reported, it was a really cool experience because my first launch was also the last launch that a colleague of mine will participate on. And he has been in NARAC for almost 40 years and is still working with NARAC. And so we both wanted to go early. So we were the first ones to report to the control center, and we just kind of stood and took a deep breath, and we got a picture of the two of us together, kind of passing the baton for NARAC. And it was a nice moment to take it all in and then get down to business.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. That's amazing. It's cool to hear stuff like that. It's just that moment to share together, pass the baton, like you said, and that there's only a few moments like that in that you can experience in life where you really feel that. So that's incredible. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
Now, what do you feel best prepared you for your career? Now we got a chance to talk a lot about what you've done so far, but what do you feel best prepared you for the field, for the jobs you have, and is there something you wish you would have known before entering the workforce?
Yeah, I could go into all of the technical things, the math and the coding, and all of those things are definitely important. But I think when you get into actually thinking about your career and your performance as an employee, and for me, the thing that best prepared me is probably coming from a big family, because that allowed me to learn how to work on a team. It allowed me to always see what somebody brings to the table, even if, maybe that person is not your best friend. Maybe you would never want to see them outside of work, but you need to value what they bring to the team and be able to work together. And I'm lucky it's quite easy with NARAC. We get along beautifully as a team. We all work very hard together, but being able to be a part of a team, to multitask, right? When you're in an emergency response scenario, you have to be able to multitask and think clearly under pressure. And maybe being a mom helps me with that. And finally, honestly, just the desire to learn, because no career is going to be so narrow and cut and dry that whatever you learned in college is going to get you through. You have to be able to continue to learn and therefore not have an ego, right? You can't feel like you know it all. And I'm very much comfortable with asking questions. And I once was like, I wonder if they're going to judge me that I don't know these things yet. But instead I was getting good reviews about my willingness to ask questions and recognize, this is why we have a team. I don't know everything, but my colleague can supplement my knowledge with their knowledge and experience. And together as a team, we can really bring our best to the table. So I think teamwork and multitasking and the desire to always want to learn something are the things really that best prepared me for my career.
And I think you really, one of the things that you hit on a lot of great points there, but I also think the ego, I think absolutely, I mean, in a lot of different careers, that's true. Whether it's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, like say with STEM, or, with what we do here at the museum, everybody has to pitch in and do things that maybe, there's none of that, that's not my job. There's none of that. You jump in, you work together, and you make it happen. And also talking about willingness to ask questions. I think there's sometimes we talked about earlier about confidence, and I think oftentimes we're afraid to ask questions because we don't want to, like you said, look like we don't know anything or anything about that particularly. But no one does. No one knows everything, and the only way you're going to learn is if you ask those questions. So I think that's true. Jumping in makes a difference, and it shows something to the people that you're working with and working for.
Yeah, and I think it's especially essential in the type of work that NARAC does, right? Because there might be lives on the line and you cannot let your ego get in the way. So we have the standard, nobody ever will be left alone to put out a product. No matter if it's the middle of the night, because we have staff on call 24/7, but there's always more than one. And if something ever happens, they're pulling in as many people as necessary because they understand, things happen. Nobody is perfect. And we want to make sure that we are putting out the best possible information. So we look over each other's work and we're not afraid to question each other or to ask for help because we know that the mission is greater than one of our egos. And so it makes it very comfortable to work on the team and where people feel comfortable to grow and learn and be our best and not just hide behind a false ego.
Yeah, absolutely. And also learning to rely on one another. And like you said, it's more than just, working in a group, is that, this is, as you mentioned, you're all in this together. Everything's on the line, and, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? Like, and, yes. You have to have that connection. You have to be in there all in and lift each other up. Otherwise it doesn't work. And that ego has to be left at the door, for sure.
Exactly.
Now, do you have any stories about overcoming challenges or adversity that you'd be willing to share with us? I know we talked a little bit about some of the things, but are there anything in particular you'd like to mention, just things that you've encountered?
Whew. There's been some bumps along the road. Let's see, I'll pick one for today. I think the one that makes the best or worst, the worst story and therefore the best story, is a couple months, 1 month to the day actually, before I was supposed to file my dissertation. I was living in Albuquerque, already getting ready to start my job, and I went out for lunch. My kids were at daycare. My husband at the time was at work, and I came home from running a couple errands. It was the week before Christmas, and I wanted to get one last present, and my entire house had been ransacked. Just everything was gone.
Oh my goodness.
The door was, the door was laying in my living room. All of the gifts were gone from under the tree, every electronic, every piece of jewelry, everything. But I didn't care. The main thing is And of course, I had called the police. We didn't know if the people were still in the house. And as soon as the police got there, the only thing I said is, go look for my computer, because I was
Oh
so
yeah.
close to filing my dissertation. They took my computer. They took notes off of my, I mean, they took everything. And I was not working on anything that was like a security concern. So there was nothing, crazy like that. But when I had safes that I had hidden in diaper boxes in each of my kids' closets, they found those safes and broke them open, and surely thought that there was something of value on the hard drives because they were locked away. It was just my dissertation on, ecophysiology. And they took all of my hard drives, they took everything. And so that was a huge setback for me, because I knew nothing except for the blue collar jobs that I was exposed to at home, or this one path I was set on to become a professor, right? Do research, become a professor. I had no idea of how to apply my skills elsewhere, what to do. And I was literally a month away from getting my PhD. But if you don't have that PhD, I could not start my next job. I couldn't go out and advertise myself as a PhD. So I had no choice but to finish, right? There was nothing left for me to do. I had my 2 kids. We had already moved to Albuquerque. And so that was really a moment where it's like, okay, this is make or break it. And thanks to the support of my family, my mother-in-law, my husband at the time, everybody, it was all hands on deck to support me emotionally as much as logistically in getting it redone. And so I went back to the raw data that was stored at Berkeley and just reworked everything in a manner that would be the minimal unit acceptable to my committee, because they knew I had already done the work. They had seen the drafts. So of course, this was before massive cloud computing or
That
cloud backups.
I mean, obviously everything worked out, but that sounds like a nightmare to deal with, especially, with the move, the kids, everything. It's a lot of, like you said, needing emotional support. That's a lot to deal with at one time. And how long did it take you to get everything done and finished?
Yeah, so at the time I was supposed to have started my job with University of New Mexico in Los Alamos on February 1st. And that position was funded by a National Science Foundation fellowship. And so I talked to them, and there was a deadline for when that had to start, right? And I was now beyond the deadline if I pushed it back any further. So luckily, thanks to the compassion of a program manager at National Science Foundation, the folks at UNM and LANL were happy to wait for me. But the compassionate person at National Science Foundation allowed me to delay it, but only until I think June 1st. So I had 6 months to find a computer,
Right.
fly back to Berkeley, and instead of filing my dissertation, collect all of my data again off of backups on CDs at the time, I think, stored away there. And then it was just dig in. My husband would take the kids to the zoo and I would stay home. The kids would be asleep and I would be up working. I mean, it was just around the clock, get it done, because I had that job waiting for me.
I was going to say you probably had a lot of late nights burning the midnight oil just to get everything done in 6 months, and that's wow. And for those who might not be familiar, like how long did it take you to do everything originally?
6.5 years.
That's
Six
what
and
I
a half
figured.
years.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's what I figured.
But I
That's a
had
lot.
both of my kids. So I didn't take any
Yeah.
time off. I pretty much took maybe 3 weeks off for each of my kids. After my first child was born, I was doing ecophysiology research, and I was dependent on the seasons of the year. I can't just set up in a lab. I was going out to nature, and my daughter was born in February and the leaves came out in March. So I was out in the field with my daughter strapped to my back doing research when my daughter was maybe 4 weeks old.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, those are some challenges. Absolutely, those are some things to deal with and learn from. So that's incredible. And now, as a woman and a minority in a STEM field, have you had any interesting or unexpected experiences?
Yeah, of course, there's been some of those to share also along the way, but I think one that I will share that happened recently, and because I can kind of laugh about it, and my skin is very thick at this point. But I was in the hotel in Florida. We were in the lobby and we were waiting to meet the administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration. She was coming down to kind of give the pep talk and meet the Department of Energy staff that was working. And so, in very much my style, I had on my heels and my pencil skirt and, my official launch polo for the Mars launch that we were all wearing. And I'm standing in a group of men, and we're in the lobby waiting, and a guy comes in from the pool area, and he just walks straight to me and says, "Hey, there's no towels in the pool area. Can you bring some more out?" Making this assumption that I'm an employee, seeing everybody. And at the time I was standing there with my big boss from headquarters at Department of Energy, and some folks from Vegas, and some folks from around the country in different parts of the Department of Energy. And they were a little shocked.
Well, that's what I was actually just gonna ask you, how did you react to that? Did any of your colleagues say anything? Because that's awful. I don't know how else to say it. It's just flabbergasted right now.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't know if you can hear my voice, for those of you who aren't, obviously, who can just listen, but I'm a pretty personable person. Like I'm a little bit peppy or whatever, I can laugh things off and smile. And so I just kind of laughed and was like, I had at this point been staying at the hotel for 45 minutes. So I probably could have gone and gotten the towels, or 45 days, sorry. So I probably could have gone and gotten the towels for this person, but I just kind of laughed and said, "Oh no, I practically live here, but I don't work here. There's the front desk that way, and I'm sure they'll help you." And I just kind of laughed it off. And as the man walked in, the guy just kind of was like, "Meh, okay."
First off, that's a great response. So your colleagues, what was their reaction? Were they, what did they think?
Yeah. So I think my big boss from DC headquarters, Department of Energy headquarters, he kind of just stood there with his mouth open. He was just like, that did not just happen. No way. And they looked completely shocked.
Sort of like I just did, for those of you who can't, because this is audio. My mouth was agape as well as you were talking about this. So yeah, I can imagine there was a lot of those.
Yeah, and I think he just kind of watched me and was maybe a little bit surprised with how casually I took this, how I took it, in stride. And I looked at him and I just laughed, and I'm like, that's not the first time something like that has happened to me. And he was just shocked because he only knows me as Jessica, the NARAC scientist, right? And in this group of people standing there, I think mostly white men, they said, I've heard of these things happening, but it seemed crazy. I couldn't really picture it. And I can't believe I just observed that. And there was also an African American gentleman there who is a Fed and works for Department of Energy. And he's like, "Yep, that's happened to me as well." And it was kind of this moment, I'm very lucky. All of the people that I work with across the complex of Department of Energy are wonderful. And I haven't had experiences within my current position like that. Very much, we accept each other and encourage each other on an intellectual and on a respectful basis, right? And so I think it was just kind of a moment of realization of the experiences that others have in STEM.
Yeah, and seeing it firsthand, I think it's one thing to hear about it in kind of the articles and in different pieces like that, but to actually witness it in person, and to also realize that this is a norm for some people. This is a thing that they deal with. And so, I'm sure it's a great kind of teachable moment there for them as well, to realize, with you're talking about the African American gentleman who said, no, this happens. And, something for them to kind of realize, oh, yeah, no, this isn't something that's a million miles away. It happens every day. Now, now, do you have any advice? How we always close out the podcast episodes here is, do you have any advice or words of wisdom for students or their guardians and teachers who may be listening? And I also understand that you're heavily involved in STEM outreach. So are there any resources, organizations that you recommend that they check out?
Yeah. So for the first part of your question about advice, I think something that I alluded to earlier is that coming from a background like my own, blue collar, rural, I didn't have a lot of exposure to things. So I think putting a lot of pressure on young girls, what do you want to be when you grow up? Even if it's with the best of intents, it might narrow the girl's vision a bit, anybody's vision a bit. And so I think to teach young girls to really, and anybody really, to know themselves, to understand, right? The three things that I always say should guide your career are your values, your skills, and your interests. And if you can keep those in mind as you start to learn about different things that are outside of your current worldview, then you'll be able to trust your instinct on where you should go. So I think one piece of advice for parents and educators is to try to avoid the trap of asking girls what they want to be when they grow up. Ask them what their interests are. Ask them where they see their skills being, or their values. And if their skills don't align with their values and their interests, help them to develop that confidence in those skills and develop those skills, so that they can, meander on their own path through life and not feel plugged into one particular path that might be narrow-sighted. For young girls, I would say, don't be afraid of a challenge. Don't feel like if it's hard, it must be because it's not for you, but also don't, similarly to what I said to the parents and educators, don't feel trapped by something that you've told yourself you want to be when you grow up. If you've said, I want to be an engineer, and you will get down this path of engineering and you just don't feel it. Don't feel like a quitter for trusting your instinct and pivoting. You definitely want to be in a career where you don't, the thing, if you love your career, you'll never work a day in your life or something. No, it's always going to be work, but if it's something you love, it'll be rewarding work and you'll be energized instead of drained every day, right? You might be drained some days, but you'll also be energized. So for the young girls, I would say, don't feel trapped by an idea of what you should be when you grow up. Don't be afraid of a challenge, and trust your instincts. Let that guide your career path. With the outreach part, that I think is the coolest benefit of having all of the benefits that I've had of being involved in the Mars project. I think the outreach, I've done outreach for quite a few years now, but I think the platform that being involved in a NASA launch has given me to reach out has really brought a lot of joy to me. And because I do enjoy reaching out and relating to girls and really seeing that light come on of like, I can talk to her, I can relate to her. She, something about me or this child or my life or my experience lets them see themselves for a minute, right, in something that they might not have otherwise imagined. And so I am two organizations that I am directly involved in. One is Expanding Your Horizons. I have done workshops and was a keynote speaker for their conference. And then also I'm on the Bay Area Council for Girls Start. And both of these organizations really work to provide STEM enrichment activities for approximately middle school girls. And I think that's just really a key point to reach young girls. And so especially on the Girls Start website, which is an organization that I spend year round being engaged with, they have a lot of activities. They're active in the Bay Area. They're active, I think, in Texas and in Boston now, and it's always growing. And so that is an organization that I never regret giving time, giving money, giving resources, whatever I can to.
Well, those are all great resources, and we'll make sure to include this, especially when we put it on social media and our YouTube channel. We'll make sure to have those links as well. That sounds great, and I must say, with your personality, you must be wonderful at outreach because it is infectious, and this has gone by fast. So
yeah, I think I'm still just a kid at heart, and I get excited and I can't take myself too seriously. I'm in awe with my colleagues all the time like a kid, and I want to share that excitement. But before I do want to share another resource. I will say, especially through COVID, the lab and the Department of Energy as a whole has really invested a lot of resources into developing videos on YouTube. And so even with my own kids, I will sit and we will look at all kinds of videos on different parts of the lab, different parts of science. There are of a special interest to the audience, to your audience. there are a ton of historical videos now of the testing, the atomic testing that was done in Nevada many years ago. And a lot of those videos have now become unclassified and are shared online. And so there are just so many resources through Lawrence Livermore's YouTube page and Department of Energy's YouTube page that are really fun for kids to engage with.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's a really great shout, and also I know with also some of their other social media platforms, they also have a lot of the older pictures from a lot of that testing. There are some that we even use for when we're trying to get an idea or if we're doing a presentation, because all of that is public domain at this point. So it's great to see a lot of this black and white or color photos of a lot of the old tests and the site itself, what it looked like. No, that's perfect. And so thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with me, Dr. Osuna. And thank you to everyone out there listening to this podcast. If you would like to learn more about the National Atomic Testing Museum or Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, you can visit our websites at nationalatomictestingmuseum.org and llnl.gov. You can find the NATM on Facebook and Twitter by searching Atomic Museum. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
No, just thanks a ton for having me on. This was really fun, and I cannot wait to get there and visit the museum in person.
We'd love to have you. Thank you so much, Dr. Osuna.
Thank you.